Hello people of Earth, hello people across the multiverse. I'm Prince Tumi and welcome to Writing Thoughts. Today I want to talk about originality, tropes and inspiration. Have you ever shared an idea you had with a family or friend, an idea that you've spent a lot of work and time and energy fleshing out, from your characters to your world building to how your story is going to go from point A to point B to point C. You've maybe planned book 1 all the way to book 7 and you have a very clear idea in your head of how your story is going to be this mind-blowing, beautiful masterpiece. But then when you share it with your family or friends, they're able to look at some of your ideas and say, hang on a second, your idea is very similar to this popular franchise. You're a thief. You have no original ideas. Talk to me again when your ideas are original, or don't talk to me at all. Have you ever been through that? Or some variation of that? And has it ever brought you down because now you feel like you're stealing your ideas from something else, or you feel like you have to defend yourself and say, no, hang on a second, I'm not a thief, this is my idea. Yeah, sure, I was inspired by something popular, but that doesn't mean I stole it. But no matter what you say and no matter what you do, people keep saying you're a thief, you're unoriginal, and that your story will never get anywhere because you can't come up with your own thing. I want to tell you something. Ignore those people. Don't listen to them. Everybody is so fixated on everything being 100% original when there's nothing in the 21st century that is 100% original, because every idea that could have been used has already been used. The only thing you can do is take this common trope or this common theme and make it your own. The only way a story can ever be original is in the way that you give it your personal flavor. Just like every single human on earth has fingers and thumbs, but every single human on earth also has their own unique fingerprints. So it doesn't really matter what trope you use. It doesn't really matter if you're using a common cliche. What matters is you find a way to make this common trope or this common cliche original and fresh in your way. Let's look at iron suits, for example. Armored suits that were high-tech and full of hundreds of thousands of weapons and gadgets and whatnot have always been common among anime and comic books and sci-fi books and sci-fi movies. And yet the moment the Iron Man movies came out, anytime anything else uses an armored suit that can fly or shoot lasers or anything, people immediately say that the writers of this story is stealing from the Iron Man movies, when the fact of the matter is Iron Man was not the first story or even the first movie to have a guy in an armored suit. The movies that's with Robert Downey Jr. just happened to make this thing very iconic. When we think when we think of armored suits, or when we think of high-tech suits, we immediately think of Iron Man because of how iconic Iron Man is. But just because Iron Man is iconic, that doesn't mean that this idea can no longer be used. That doesn't mean that you are suddenly original and unoriginal. It just means that you're going to have to find your own way to make your armored suit story fresh and unique. You're going to have to find your own way to make your story iconic. The same thing goes with fantasy stories. In fantasy, it's very common for fantasy writers to have a fictional world with a set number of kingdoms, with each with their own unique culture and each with their own monarchy and their own different way of doing things. And it's also very common for a lot of fantasy stories to have 3 or 4 kingdoms within their stories. But Avatar: The Last Airbender came out a few years back and made the whole 4 kingdoms thing a very iconic and well done thing. Avatar took fantasy tropes and used them in some of the most iconic and beautiful ways. And today, if you as a writer say that you have your own fantasy story or your own sci-fi story and it's set in a world with 4 or 5 kingdoms, people immediately link it to Avatar and accuse you of stealing from Avatar, when the fact of the matter is you, just like the writers of Avatar, are using a trope that has been used by hundreds of thousands of other people. But now, because Avatar has made it such an iconic thing, it's more difficult for you to present your idea as original, because people have this idea that because somebody made it iconic, nobody else can use it, when the fact of the matter is, yes, you can. I'm using the fact of the matter is a lot, aren't I? I bet you could play a drinking game from that. But don't get drunk yet, I'm not done talking. Just because something has made a trope iconic, it doesn't mean you can't use it. Just because your story has slight similarities to another story, it doesn't automatically make it unoriginal. Even the popular stories took inspiration from something. Everything took inspiration from everything else. There is nothing new under the sun. And you've got to stop beating yourself up just because some naysayer says that you're not a good writer or that you have no original ideas, just because something has slight similarities to your idea. I mean, I remember when I was toying with the idea of creating a fictional language for one of my stories, and I hadn't really decided whether or not I wanted to do it, but I was considering it. And when I shared this with my friend, he immediately said that I was stealing from Lord of the Rings, because apparently Lord of the Rings has its own made-up language and it was a very well-known and popular thing. The thing is, I've never read Lord of the Rings. I don't like Lord of the Rings. I don't like the Lord of the Rings movies or books or anything. It's just not my thing. So I have no idea whatsoever what happens in those books. But even though I didn't know what happens in those books, the mere fact that it was in there and that I was considering making a fake language meant that somehow I was not being original with my own ideas. And that doesn't make any sense. I mean, is Lord of the Rings the first story to have fictional languages in it? Are you telling me that there's no other story that was written before Lord of the Rings that had people making up fictional languages for their books? Get out of here. And with fantasy stories, are you really going to tell me that Avatar: The Last Airbender is the first story in the entire Earth's history, in the entire history of writing, to ever have 4 kingdoms set in their fictional world? Are you going to tell me that Iron Man is the only story in the entire Earth that started off with a man in a high-tech iron armored suit, and that there has been no story before or after the movies? Sorry, that there's been no story ever before the movies that came up with that idea first? Are you kidding me? I'm sure that even Iron Man was inspired by something. So don't beat yourself up just because somebody calls you unoriginal. Don't beat yourself up just because somebody is accusing you of stealing or being cliche because you're using a trope that everyone else has used. Make the trope yours. Make it fresh, make it real, make it you. Because nobody can write that trope the way you can. Nobody can make that story fresh the way you can. Each and every single one of us has an idea that was inspired by something else, but we have a way of making it beautiful in a way that nobody else can. I mean, there's even another idea I had that I was so sure nobody else came up with. That I was so sure that nobody had thought of. And then when I shared it with a different friend of mine a few months ago, she said, hey, you know what? I actually read a webcomic that is very similar to your idea. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me? But no, this was mine. Who's going forward in the future and stealing all of my ideas and bringing them to the past? How is that even possible? And then so I tracked down this webcomic and I gave it a read, and it was incredible. And yeah, the beginning of the comic was very much like my idea, but there were also a lot of very clear and distinct differences and a lot of creative directions that this writer took that I am not going to take. My story is going to take a completely different direction from the one that's the author of the story used. So that alone proves that I'm not stealing somebody's idea, because we didn't even have the same creative direction with the basis of our similar plots. Similarity doesn't automatically mean you're stealing. If you're going to set a story in Hawaii, that doesn't mean you're stealing from Lilo and Stitch and Moana, does it? Are you telling me that there were no other stories around Hawaii before Lilo and Stitch and Moana became a thing? If you write a story set in Africa, it doesn't mean that you're suddenly stealing from Black Panther, because Africa has hundreds of thousands of stories and myths that were around long before Black Panther was ever a thing. And if you write a story set in a fictional school with superpowered people or with magical people, or with any type of people, does that suddenly mean you're stealing from Harry Potter? Does that suddenly mean you're stealing from X-Men? Heck no, because this has been a thing long before those stories came to be. There is nothing holding you back except for self-doubt. Don't let the haters stop you. Keep doing your thing. Don't steal people's ideas, but take the tropes and make it yours. I mean, let's look at anime. Anime uses the same tropes a lot of times, but yet each and every single anime does it in an original way. I mean, all of them usually, well, a lot of the shonen anime especially, usually has the theme of somebody discovering they have powers, being taken on by a master, being made stronger thanks to the training of the master, and then somewhere along the line the master leaves them, and they end up getting a random power-up because their friends were getting hurt, and then the master reunites with them, and then the master's old students comes back and kills them, and then the master dying at the hands of his old students suddenly makes the protagonist get another random power-up and then defeats the master's old students, and it goes on and on and on, rinse, cycle, repeat. Like, I'm sure you've already thought of 5 different animes just from me saying this, but even though a lot of animes use the same sort of cycle, they all do it in their own fresh and unique way. And nobody criticizes anime for it. No, people just don't like to criticize anime for doing a lot of things that a lot of other type of writers do. Keep doing your thing. I'm kind of rambling. I actually did plan this talk to be a bit more structured, and then I kind of got away with myself. So sorry about that, or if you enjoyed it, if you actually do enjoy all of my rambling, you're welcome. My mind is always all over the place. But the gist of my message is, don't let these people bring you down. Don't let these people dictate what you can and cannot put in your story. If you have a fictional language you want to put in your story, put it in. If your fictional kingdom has 4 specific kingdoms with their own cultures, put it in. If you're writing a story about a man with an armored suit, put it in. Don't blatantly steal from the popular franchises, but find a way to make your story iconic with your unique flavor and wow the world with it. Because there is nothing new. There is nothing original. Even Batman was inspired by something. And the thing that inspired Batman, that was inspired by something else. And the thing that inspired that was inspired by something else. You cannot have an original idea because they do not exist anymore. Every single thing we can do as writers has already been done. What hasn't been done is the way that you can bring it about. And I cannot wait to see the unique ways that you bring your stories into the world. You can do it. I believe in you. Write those beautiful stories and amaze us. I love you all, and I will see you next time. Peace out, people of Earth, and peace out, people in the multiverse everywhere.